I'd like to welcome you to a really exciting, fabulous Friday that I've been looking forward to with Dr. Justin Velten. Say hi, Justin.
Hey, everybody.
And if you're not familiar with Dandi Day, or myself, Dandi Day is a conscious beauty firm, and we really work with supply chain to try to bridge the gap between ingredient companies doing good for people on the planet and brands that have the reach to create that change one person at a time. And one of the ways that we really do that is through these Fab Friday talks that is focused on building consciousness for the beauty industry in our everyday lives to give us actionable tools to go and make a change. So to expand our thinking and kind of push us a little bit to get uncomfortable so we actually can make changes. And so it's a very special discussion today, not only because of its huge relevance, but Justin, you and I have known each other since we were in college, but through your wife, who's been my dear friend since we were 12. And so so it's always fun to see where life takes you, and getting to meet at these interesting places in our journey. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you inviting me to be a part of this. I'm excited about it. I couldn't help but notify a handful of friends recently that I was being interviewed on a beauty podcast. I had to get some mileage out of that. They couldn't believe it, and neither could I. But so I'm an honor. It's an honor to be here. If you need to take my screen off so that people don't confuse me with a beauty product representative, I understand that.
no, not at all. Well, it's really funny because when I think about you and Laura, your wife, like Laura knows how much like I love makeup, and I have this very specific memory of going over to their house with this CVS bag full of like discount makeup products. And as a poor college student, I was shamefully came in, I was like, I just spent $50 on makeup. And Laura looked at me, she's like, oh, okay. So just like just a fun kind of memory, and my passion for makeup. So it's fun to have us all here together. And I think also like you're going to be sharing with us about the beauty of science and your program that you have to be able to measure DEI. But also one of the interesting things about the beauty space is that I think we're one of the most inclusive and diverse, I would say, industries in the market. Maybe you're right along there with fashion. And when you think about beauty in terms of the beauty industry and the tools that are available for self-expression, enhancement, how people identify, and the things that they have access to be able to create that persona or who they are and to exhibit that to the world. So I think this is a huge relevant conversation. And so I would love to hear a little bit more about your background and just your journey as far as studying, the places you've been, your travels and the things that you've learned, your relationship with your mentor, and kind of getting us up to speed to what's happening right now.
Yeah, happy to do that, Hayley. It's great. It's a great question. And again, super glad to be here with you, and hope that your listeners are able to pull something valuable from what little bit I can share. So I think there are a lot of places where we could start, but I do think it's important as we start in this journey. I play a role in this, but I am by no means the end all catch all. There are so many great people doing incredible work in this space, and they've been doing it, whether they've been doing it a week or whether they've been doing it decades. And so it's an honor to be a small piece of this and this whole framework. We know that this space has, of course, the last 10 months, maybe 8 to 10 months, has seen an incredible increase in public awareness, public interest. And while that's good, there are a handful of us who have been for the last number of decades working in this space in not business wise or trying to develop a product, but really looking at what research is available, what can we generate in new discoveries, what can we turn into something that is actually usable. And so that's the kind of just a framing of our story. You know, I grew up as a Midwestern kid. You know, the things we're going to talk about today were totally foreign to me, and probably have a relatively sheltered upbringing. And but then later in life, makes me sound like I'm you know, grandfather here. But you know, went to college, got a degree in PR, and thought, well, I really want to be a mentor to college students. So I saw that role as super valuable as a college student. I thought, man, that's what I want to do. I want to go and teach communication, like how do we, like social interaction and communication, and teach that to students, you know. And you know, how do we do really well at that? How do we learn about ourselves? How do we learn about others? How do we mix all that together? And then because of that, whether we are similar to somebody or we're different from somebody, how do we just do this well? And so had a degree in PR. Then I went on to and earned a master's degree in what's called human communication. And this is long about the time Hayley and you and I would have met, somewhere in the 2005 range, somewhere in that ballpark. And I was studying under a guy by the name of Carly Dodd. Now, if you've studied, or if people have studied in this area of what's called intercultural communication or intercultural competence, then you've surely run across this name. Carly Dodd for decades has been one of the leading scholars in this area of intercultural competence. And so, yeah, I'll be honest with you, at the time that I met Carly, I was on this trajectory I wanted to be a college professor, and I wanted to be a mentor in that role and do those things. And then I met Carly Dodd, and I was like, who is this guy? He's super, just a genuine, incredible human being. And he helped me understand so much more, at a greater level of understanding what it is, this idea of human interaction. And he came to me in about 2005 and he said, hey Justin, I want to tell you about this thing I've been working on. And at the time, he had been spending about 8 years in the process of doing some deep diving into this idea of social interaction across cultures. Why do some of us do really, really, really well at that, and some of us really struggle at this? And we were looking at this in the context of relocation, and that's a very high stress, great way to test our social interaction aptitudes cross culturally, because if we can drop somebody into a new atmosphere, a new context with people who look, act, and smell differently from us, right? Then that really is a taxing moment to see. You know, it's not just, can I reach across to my neighbor and get to know my neighbor in my safe community. It's I mean, if I'm really put into it here, am I going to really do well, or am I going to struggle? And so I think it's important to point out, you know, early on here, that any of your attendees who can see me can see that I am a white American male. Now, for some people, that can be very off-putting, and they think, well, what does this person know about DEI, or what is this person? And I want to acknowledge this up front, because I think that's important, that we not only acknowledge this, but just kind of briefly talk about this for a second, Hayley. There's kind of pause in the story, because I think there's an assumption that just because somebody is a white male, that they are an enemy to the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that's a mistake. I mean, I know stereotypes happen. We all stereotype. We all do these different things. But Carly Dodd and I, also a white male, who again some would see as an enemy in this situation. In about 1998, he started the process of looking deeply into this so that we can make an impact for individuals and families and organizations to understand this better, make an impact. So he spent 8 years, and for a top scholar to spend 8 years on a single thing is really, it's relatively uncommon. And so he spent 8 years developing a really highly reliable data tool to help us look at individual aptitudes in these things. And so after those 8 years is when I met Carly, and he was really excited about it. He said, "Look, I think we can do this. We can discover these things, and we can help all these people." And I remember just what an incredible guy. I think Hayley, you know Carly Dodd, and Carly's
Yeah.
who's in he's in his 80s now, and Carly, I remember thinking like, this is incredible, and my mind immediately I was thinking, well, you could make this product and sell this. It was kind of my early naive stage, and he said, Justin, it's just it's not about that. It's about helping people, and it's about influencing, and it's about creating a better experience for people. And I was like, who is this guy? And so I tell you that to tell for people to hear, just because we look at somebody and they may not fit what is becoming a stereotypical diversity type role, or that a diversity advocate type role, doesn't mean that they don't belong in that space. We all need people who are in different positions and different life experiences to play a role, to ally, to advocate, to learn, to research, and all these things. We were fortunate enough to be in a position to where, as scholars, that we could invest in ourselves to find some solutions. And so not to drag the answer on too long, Hayley, is just to tell you. So I went on to get a doctorate in intercultural studies. Carly's, of course, background is in that area as well. And after his 8 years of development of this model, we could have gone and said, hey, everybody, look, we want to sell something, but that wasn't it at all. We spent the next 13 years just testing this thing. We worked with thousands of individuals representing work in over 40 different countries, all this data and testing and sending people out and testing them, pre-testing and training. And it was just this incredible experience that really it was predominantly Carly and I doing this. And then we began to see that not only just working, but it would be great if we could help more people. I think that's kind of some more of the story we can tell later, but we began to see that we can train people, we can evaluate, get some incredible data, train people, and get them more prepared to do this kind of cross-cultural cohesion thing really, really well.
Well, it's very exciting, and I really do appreciate you acknowledging what some people might call the elephant in the room. And I will admit, I was like, oh, I never thought that. Yeah, Justin, DEI. So just quick
I understand.
So
I've never been called an elephant, but I'll take that. That's
okay. You're really, elephants are wonderful. They're very useful. So yeah, but we're yeah, so I do want to say that we really appreciate just acknowledging that and setting that stage. It's important, and I think it's also a testament to the kind of person you are, and to bring that to the table, bring that baseline of understanding, and yeah. So thank you. I did want to. I think after you share the story. I think that leads us to the next point that I wanted to ask about, this convergence of your research with technology. So as I understand, you have 15 different kind of buckets that you've been able to identify. And over those 13 years of research, you've created a benchmark or a baseline of based on your the cohorts in the study. So I'm going back to my psychology minor. Did I use that term right? The cohorts.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about how all that research is then put into a SAS program for using technology to be able to measure this?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, there's a little bit of background noise there.
All right.
So for generations, and this is really disheartening information, but for generations, I once did some research with a guy who was one of the top 7 literacy scholars in the whole world, and it was really fun to do research with him because he was working in like these middle schools and best practices in literacy, and I was totally out of my element, but I was able to come in kind of as a group communication guru in this studies. It was really fun. But I once heard him tell an audience that course, this was pre-COVID, things are accelerated now, but best practices in learning from the moment they are discovered, probably possibly to say in an academic study, to the moment they are implemented in the classroom. Guess how long that period is, Hayley?
Well, I would say as a scientist working in the scientific field, might be a little bit of an unfair question, but I would say maybe 10 to 15 years. Am I wrong?
Okay, you're on the right track. It's 30
Okay,
years.
30 years.
30
Okay.
years. Yeah, so you think, again, COVID has accelerated learning pedagogy and online and different things decades ahead of, not ahead of time, but ahead of the usual pace. But pre-COVID, so it took about 30 years. And that tends to be the case with even incredible, life-changing, beneficial studies that are done in academia. So I was a college professor for 14 years. And all this research, and I've seen it of my stuff, I've seen it of others, you know, you do these publications in these academic journals, which are so hard to get in and get published. And then academics are just so proud of that. Put that on the tenure docket. You know, I can look how good I'm doing. I want it tenure, and they put that book on the shelf, and that publication stays there. And just think what they could have done with that. Like what they could have, how they could have helped people with their discoveries. But oftentimes, sadly, that's where it stops. It stops with that publication, goes on the shelf. And we didn't want to do that. I really kind of committed to myself early career that if I'm going to do research, I want to do something that makes a difference. I want to do something that really helps people. And so I was really excited to jump in with Carly over those years and do some stuff that I knew could have an incredible impact. So about 7 years ago, when Carly and I were doing these studies year after year after year with different groups, different places, and we saw that it was helping people over and over. I want to say every single time we ran one of these studies where we would evaluate people, and we would coach them or train them, and then test them again, and maybe send them abroad or whatever. And every single time we saw statistically significant improvement in their kind of pre to post test scores. So I mean, that's a pretty big deal. And we also saw that we could evaluate someone's aptitudes in these areas at what's called a reliability score of 93%. And you may think, well, why not 100%? Well, when we're talking about research, kind of nerd world here for a second, Hayley, if most people who have, you know, kind of a data evaluation models in this area, it's about a 43% reliability. Now you're thinking, well, that is not good. But the reality is 43% in research lingo is actually pretty good, respectable. If you can get 70% or above in your data reliability, you're like in the mosh pits of a nerd concert. Okay, you're doing really well. But after building for 8 years and testing and then implementing and testing for 13 more years, so over 20 years in this, our data reliability is at 93%. I mean, no one's even close to that. I mean, that's incredible. If anybody ever tells you they're at 100, they're lying to you. So if you can be about 70, you're doing really well.
Now on the mosh pit.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, throw us out. I mean, we're backwards body surfing, having a great time. So but you know, we don't want to rest on that, but we want to be able to say, hey, it's really cool now to be able to say, hey, we're going to do an evaluation, and the information we're going to give you about an individual or group of people, you can take it to the bank. Like it's really accurate information. There's not much room for error here in what we're doing now. So about 7 or 8 years ago, Carly would come to me and he'd say, hey, why don't you take what we've done and the good that we're doing and do something with it? Like, you know, make it more available to people, because at that point it was still maybe the two of us, maybe a couple others doing these groups and these things. And it was really good, but it was super time consuming. We were teaching full time, doing these things. And so what we did is, in that situation, Hayley, most people would say, just put your program online. That's how you scale something like that. And yeah, I think you can. But what we did is we were too nerdy and too protective of the legitimacy that we had developed to just put something online. And so we actually spent a season testing it, because that's what good nerds do. You know, when you're PhD involved, you test things. And so we tested an in-person group against an online group, and mind you, this online was very rudimentary. It wasn't like a nice flashy thing. It was just an online version of the same thing we were doing in person. And what we found, Hayley, is that a true data set comparison, the online group outperformed the in-person group when you're looking at pre to post
Interesting.
test data differences.
Okay.
Yeah, and we were surprised. We were hoping that if they did okay, then we could feel good about maintaining
Okay.
the legitimacy of the evaluation, the strength of the
Mhm.
training, and all this. But when they outperformed, it was kind of this aha moment that we're not sure why. We have some speculation why. We just wanted to know if. And
Yeah.
so, but it looks like people can learn this even better online. And
Mm.
so what we began to do is over the years, kind of two parts of your question here, we began to see that, okay, we can do this and help a lot more people if we do this online. And so we
Mm.
began to, with some really strong pedagogical models, put this to an online platform that allows us to get enterprise solution and DEI to organizations by evaluating the workforce,
Mhm.
training the workforce, tracking data progress over time in their DEI aptitudes or attitudes and behaviors, and then and then to certify those employees in the organization. How you get to those? So we do have 15 competencies we're looking at,
Mhm.
and how you get to those is it's a matter of, again, digging into. At the time, there was only about 35 to 40 a little more years of research around this kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Pulling off the shelf, developing our own research, doing tons of testing. And what we found is when you build a questionnaire like this, you start with a ton of questions, and then there was called the regression analysis. You begin to see
Yeah.
which ones you can weed out, which ones can cluster together, and you begin to kind of funnel these responses down to where you have 15 to 16. We tried about 16 for a while, and then we were able to bring a few more together in the last few years. But so we have 15 different areas we're looking at, and what we found is that um, these were the most prominent indicators when it comes to evaluating a person's aptitudes in diversity, equity, inclusion. Do I engage with someone who is different from me in some way? Do I want to do that? Do I not want to do that? Am I inclusive of others? And do I include myself? I think that's something that some people often
Interesting.
forget, but practitioners really understand that because it's really it's a two-way street there.
Mhm.
The importance of your family background and how we view and interact in diverse groups. And that's a
Mhm.
big one, right? I don't know that anybody else
Yeah.
looks at those things, and but you know, my um, my family experience dictates how I'm going to treat anybody, whether they're similar or different from me. Whether I was brought up believing that I should fear and hate anybody who is
Mhm.
different, whether it's religious beliefs, whatever it is, or should I be accepting and at least listen, or those things really sculpt us, and they make a big impact. So, um,
Yeah,
I,
it's so
you know,
fascinating.
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to cut you off, but we're kind of running out of time. It's been
Oh, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
really, no, no, no apologies. It's been wonderful to hear you talk more about this and the deep roots and backgrounds of the research and how it's come to this point in time. And I think it's it's such a relevant solution for where we found ourselves this year in those conversations and being so timely.
Mhm.
Um, and then I also wanted to point out, some I think all of us, well, people in the professional world, at least from the beauty side, I know talk a lot about DEI and that audience and those different type of language. But I think the broader context too is it has a link to sustainability and something for Dandi Day and the beauty industry. We're really looking for sustainable solutions. And so when you talk about social impact, when you talk about gender equality, when you talk about well-being, um, these are these are the things that really tie into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that means as we build our competency to be able to create change for greater, more foundational, greater foundation in our business, and geopolitics, right? Global commerce, capitalism, rules and regulations. And so I think just coming from that angle, from an industry angle, that's where this piece really fits in from my perspective. And so I just want the audience to really know that this is such an important component. And the ability to be able to measure, it's all about measurements, right? If you can't measure what you're doing, it's, and create a report about it, it doesn't really have a lot of as much impact in the world of commerce that we really need, to keep surviving and living. And I think also with that, there was another thought kind of flew out of my head, but
well, while you're thinking of that, can I make it? I know we're running out of time, but so what is exciting and breaks my heart at the same time is since the early summer, late spring events that really kind of threw this country into a more sincere look at these topics. Since that time, we have seen countless organizations go to social media and say, look, we have hired our director of diversity. And they kind of proclaim this, and that's great that they put somebody in that spot. That person in that spot sometimes is a very capable, well, they're all capable, but that person is very experienced and has a rich background in that area and is able to go in and make a difference. What I do see though in a lot of cases are people who are hired for those roles, and I feel sorry for them. I really do, because I'm concerned for them, because a year from now, going back to what you said, a year from now, they're going to be asked, what kind of difference, or what kind of impact are you making? And though they want to make a difference, and though their heart is in the right place, if they don't have the background or some tools to back them up, it's going to be difficult for them to substantiate their salary, right? Like, why are you here? Like, why, and I think that's where measurement is so important. To date, measurement has been predominantly in the DEI space, our talent acquisition demographic spread. How many people who look or smell, act like this have we hired this quarter? And that's helpful, but it's time to move past that. And that's what we're trying to do. We don't want to just hire people who fit certain demographic molds and then throw them into an atmosphere that is unhealthy for them. We're trying to influence that atmosphere to make it a more healthy place for every single employee.
Yeah, and it's definitely it's information. It's the data, it's the information, it's the metrics, and those are things that don't have feelings or emotions, right? Those are things that you can take in a very neutral position, and then you decide how to act upon that. And I would even say in terms of sustainability, that's something that we're struggling with as an industry to figure out. Like, we say that it's sustainable through X, Y, and Z, but actually developing measurement to show what is the year-over-year improvement, what are our goals, how do we implement new practices to be able to achieve that goal, and then assess what that change was. So I think that conversation, as you're saying, to substantiate a salary, and we see that a lot for investors, which was the point that I was trying to remember, and you just directed it so well to that. That investors, when you're looking to grow a business, and the company's aptitude to scale and be flexible and nimble as they go into other regions, other countries, this would be really, really important, right? To kind of have a baseline of how agile is your team, your executive team, to be able to execute a plan in another country. So, and you need investment dollars typically for that type of thing. So I'm just so excited, Justin. We could continue to go on. It's 2 o'clock, but we're going to have you back on as a guest to continually kind of go through and help us unpack what these different measurements look like. And we're so excited that you're going to be our newest collaborative partner, and we look forward to making so much change, creating so much change with you. So.
Yeah, thanks. Well, Hayley, thank you so much for having me on, you and Sarah and your Dandi Day team. It's great to be affiliated with you all, and proud to be doing that. And next time that we do this, I can try to make sure I've got my makeup done correctly for the pie. Okay,
we'll do like a virtual makeup session before.
I'll just go to CVS and get a bag full of stuff.
Okay, yes.
All right, thank you so much.
Does this look familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, well, have a fabulous Friday. To everybody here, Justin, to you and your family, give Laura a big hug for me. And thank you so much. Okay, be well.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.